So, guys, I want to talk about AEW Blood and Guts. And there's not a lot of people criticizing the men's match, but there's a lot of people who have a lot of positives and negatives about the women's match. Definitely, with what I've seen online, there's a lot more negatives about it. But I really think that the big thing about it is that it's star studded. It's also the first one. And then also, too, it shows that, hey, you know what? We just can't wait forever with a women's blood and guts, because the thing is that you look at WWE and you looked at how it was almost like 35 years or 40 years where it took two women to main event WrestleMania. So sometimes we got to push things out, sooner than later, but obviously it has to come down to execution. So I mean, I think that it's gonna be one of these things with AEW, like they always do. Like they do the hardcore, bloody, shock value stuff, and it grabs your attention very well. But there's not a lot of great story going into it, and that's where a lot of people struggle, because there's a great line when I was taking Screenwriting U, which is your controversy has to match the level of your story. For example, Pulp Fiction is a very well written script. It has charismatic characters. It has twists and turns. It's told in a nonlinear way, but the violence, the profane language, and everything like that, it doesn't work on its own. It needs a good story to go along with it, and it's there. You have both of that. But with AEW, they don't have that for the women's blood and guts. So that's one of the big controversies. The other big controversy about it, but I also will say too that I'm actually going to go there, and I'm going to really enjoy myself. So I think when I hear that, yeah, I respect the fact there's not a good story, but it's almost like what I said, that I think they have like 4,000 people, and that arena is 16,000 really. So imagine if you cared about these characters. Imagine if this was like, the early 2000s of WWE, where they had like, people from the Attitude Era, people from ECW, people from all over the place that were built up and that you cared about. Imagine if you had like, blood and guts between the McMahons and from Team McMahon and Team Austin, really. Like imagine if you had that, because there were so much characters, really. So it's ultimately that thing I do agree with, that if they had better story and compelling characters, and they worked in the women's division over time instead of just really throwing it under the bus for Tony Storm and Mercedes on the AEW side, and the Ring of Honor side, Athena, then you know what, you could have made more compelling characters. You could have drawn a bigger crowd to this. With that said, there's also another controversy that I have to talk about before I get into people involved, is Full Gear. And this is one of the biggest problems with AEW, is that they do a horrendous job of special shows. And what I mean by this is that it's never ever a good idea to do special show after special show after special show. I remember like last October, they had 6 or 7 special shows. And they used to have Battle of the Belts, and I'm happy they got rid of that, because, you can't have a Ring of Honor pay-per-view and then Battle of the Belts and then a regular pay-per-view. And if you think about November, okay, well, you had Fright Fest, a few days before Halloween. Now you have Blood and Guts. Then you have Full Gear. And then you have Death Before Dishonor, really. And honestly, this is like a period of like maybe like 5 weeks. You have at least, 3 pay-per-view. You have like two special shows and 2 pay-per-views. And there's really just, and it's really just like that thing too. Like you really, if you want to have special shows, you have to make sure things happen that lead you to the pay-per-view. So like I said, what would happen if the Triangle of Madness wins by what happens if the villains win by cheating? What would happen if the villains win because Bozilla, who did a great performance at Forbidden Door, comes? Or what would happen if the Babyfaces win and then you have Camille come, and Camille wants to get revenge on Mercedes for putting her on the back burner? Or what would happen if the Babyfaces have a big party the week after this, and then, or on Collision, and then they get ambushed, and then it sets up to a bunch of matches at Full Gear? So there's really none of that sense of what can we do with this show that's going to lead to matches and storylines long term and short term. Like look at the WWE. The biggest thing that they always do is that when you go to the Royal Rumble and the Elimination Chamber, the biggest thing that WWE does is say, hey, here are stars that are going to become big deals this year and then in the upcoming years, and that's important, really. So it foreshadows who's going to be successful, really. So that's why, the Royal Rumble and the Elimination Chamber means a lot, really, and even Survivor Series. But with Blood and Guts, is this really going to elevate people to bigger and better matches? Is it going to say, hey, look at these 10 women? Are there going to be something that we want to see at Wembley Stadium? Is it going to be something that we're going to see during the Australia? Are they going to be a big deal during the Australia tour? So I kind of question that. Like, these things are very important to talk about. The next thing that I want to mention is the people in the match, and I want to talk about it. There's Mercedes Moné, Megan Bayne, Marina Shafir, Triangle of Madness, which is Sky Blue, Tekla, and Julia Hart. So the people that really matter is the Triangle of Madness, because obviously they've been feuding with Queen Aminata and Jamie Hayter. So it's like what some people say, why is Mercedes in this? And it's actually bad that she's in this because she's kind of like a glory hog. So it would almost be like if you had a 6-on-6 with the men and you included Chris Jericho. If you include Chris Jericho and then you also included, a glory hog on the men's side. I can't think of something off the top of my head. On the hero side. But it was just like if you include Chris Jericho on the men's side, or you had Chris Jericho, come in and then he had his promo, and then he was talking about, and he was on the announce for the whole show, and there's a lot of spotlight on him, or there's a lot of moments that were taken away because he wants to put the camera on him. It does feel like, why is Mercedes here? She's probably going to take the spotlight off of people. So I can understand on the heel side why it makes sense, but I do feel a lot of the fans look at this as Mercedes looking out for Mercedes, but I also understand the other side of what people are saying. They want this to be star-studded. So it makes sense to have people that are names. Mercedes is a name. She draws attention, really. But the other controversy with Mercedes is what happens if she gets injured. She's holding like 12 or 13 belts now. So imagine if there's 12 or 13 tournaments in different wrestling promotions because she got injured. Or this could be another, or they can do the John Cena thing where John Cena tore his protectorial muscle. There's people who say that happened. There's some people who say that didn't happen. So that way there's an out for her to drop all those titles, really, instead of losing 13 times. Because, when you have 13 belts, you got to lose 13 times, really. So there could be that as well. I'm okay with Megan Bayne in this because she's the big badass woman. And she's always been like the villain, so it makes sense for her to be on the villain side. But again, there's no story really. Like, what would happen if you had a story where the Triangle of Madness had Megan Bayne attack Tony Storm and attack Queen Aminata and Jamie Hayter. Or what if you had like a 3-on-3 match between Triangle of Madness, with just two of those members, Julia Hart and Sky Blue, and then Megan Bayne. That would be something, really. And then it also brings me to the next person. Marina Shafir. I'm okay with her in this match because obviously there's two things. That number one, Marina Shafir and Will Nightingale should have had a match a long time ago. The other problem with Marina Shafir is that it's a little too late. But she should have had a bunch of women's championship matches, a bunch of TBS championship matches, a bunch of ROH, or you find like the babyface women, or matches with Toni Storm. Like, they should have made her more like Chyna, more like she has to prove herself. Like, honestly, she was in the Don Callis family. They would make her prove herself. But it's too late to the party for Marina to do that. But it does mean something that she's in there. It makes sense. She is a badass. She had good matches in Ring of Honor. And you have to say, okay, we have to let the horse out of the stable, really. So it's the Raw. It should have happened way long ago, really, but it makes sense to do it now because she's a villain. The Death Riders like to fuck up other people's shit, really. So it makes it. So this makes logical sense. She's an ass. She's part of the Death Riders. They're a bunch of assholes. They fuck up other people's shit. It would make sense for her to want to be part of that. When you have Triangle of Madness, I have nothing to say about that because they obviously deserve to be in there. You have Statlander. So, again, Statlander and Mercedes should not be in this. But one of the reasons why Statlander should not be in this is because, as some people say, um, though she's the women's champion. So what would happen if she got an injury and then they had to strip her of the belt, or they do that interim crap where they have to have another women's championship tournament with an interim women's championship? You know, that could happen. Or what could happen is Statlander gets injured, and then they say, okay, well, now Mercedes is the champion by default, really. Or at the Boston show next week, they'll be like, oh, well, hypothetically, Statlander's injured, so now Mercedes inherits the championship, and then they have somebody come out and challenge Mercedes at Full Gear. I don't think a lot of people like that. And then also Statlander's from Long Island, really. So she has to win, and she has to put on a hell of a performance, because it's going to be, you really have Boston versus New York through Statlander and Mercedes, really. So you have to kind of do something with that. You have Harley Cameron, and you have Harley Cameron and Willow Nightingale, and and there's a couple of issues with this as well. Really, that first of all, Willow Nightingale and Maria Shafir should have had a feud already. It worked so well. They were both in Anarchy in the Arena. They should have had multiple matches. It's unfortunate that's not happened. So it makes sense that they would be on opposite teams. That makes sense. But Harley Cameron does not make any sense, really, because there's two things. She's actually kind of bubbly and silly, so it kind of makes me kind of wonder, why would she be in this match, really? It would be just like if you had Santino Marella in a match, or it would be just like if you had the Elimination Chamber and you had R-Truth, Brock Lesnar, John Cena. Like, it just does not make sense. Or if you had the Elimination Chamber and you had Broken Matt Hardy just being like that eccentric, goofy character, so it doesn't make sense they have like that, have Harley Cameron in that role. Very parallel is Orange Cassidy, a wrestler that doesn't take matches that seriously and is a little too laid back for his own good. Why would you include wrestlers like that? It doesn't make any sense. Queen Aminata makes sense because of Triangle of Madness. Toni Storm does not make any sense because, again, why is she in this match? She has no beef with any of the other wrestlers. Quite honestly, the biggest beef she has is with Statlander, because Statlander took away her title. But the problem is, Toni Storm cannot turn heel at this point. If she betrays Statlander, or even at Full Gear, if she betrays Statlander, it's not a good move, because the audience will turn not on her but on AEW, because people want Statlander to win. It's New York versus Boston, and you don't want to piss off a bunch of New Yorkers. So it's and also too, Mercedes has gone on way too much with titles. You're getting to that point of, is it heel heat or get the fuck off my television heat? Is this Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes, or is this Bully Ray and Dixie Carter and Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff and TNA Wrestling Originals? Which one was the first one was a draw. The second one was get the fuck off my television heat. So I kind of wonder if they're going to turn Toni Storm heel, or what they're going to do with her. But obviously her winning and her participating, yes, it doesn't make sense for her to be involved in this, but she's there because obviously that's going to pop the crowd because people love Toni Storm. And then Jamie Hayter and Queen Aminata both make sense because they're in a tag team together. And obviously, too, Aminata needs to do a lot of shit in this, because the thing about it is that Aminata and Jamie Hayter, especially Aminata, she's underrated. She did talk about her goals of being the first African-born champion. So obviously she needs big spots. She needs to talk about her goals and be like, hey, you saw me kick some ass here, but now I need to kick some ass at my main goal as well, really. So there can be a good continuation. And then Triangle Madness is fucking with them, so that makes sense. And then Jamie Hayter, she's with Queen Aminata. They're in a tag team. They could possibly win. It's a great showing of a team that's in the tournament and has won something. And then I will say that I will say this. I actually made a mistake. I don't think Aminata and Jamie Hayter are in the tournament anymore, if I'm correct. I think it's just Triangle of Madness, if I'm correct. But the Triangle of Madness, it makes sense because they're already in the tournament, so it shows how good they are. And that's also kind of a controversy as well, where if the Triangle of Madness are in a women's tournament, and then Mercedes is holding 13 belts, really. The problem is that Marina Shafir could get a pin, but the problem is that Marina Shafir has she could be the one that submits, really. But the problem is with Marina Shafir is that the Death Riders has been losing a bunch, so it looks bad for them. So it'll be really interesting to see who they pick as a winner because the heels can't really lose because Megan Baines like I said, the Triangle of Madness are in the tournament. Technically trying to build up as this out of control wrestler. Mercedes has 13 belts. Megan Bain is like this powerhouse wrestler, and Marina Shafir can't lose because if she loses, to make the Death Riders look kind of stupid and weak. It's like the Don Callis family when they had Rocky Ramiro and Hechicero always losing. You can't do that. And then also Statlander, Harley Cameron, Queen Aminata, Willow Nightingale, Tony Storm, Jamie Hayter. Like really, the only two people that can pick up a loss really is Harley Cameron. You can do Harley Cameron as the loser, but also you can do one of the members of the Triangle of Madness because ultimately they're still in the tournament, so they can just cheat to get their revenge and fuck up somebody's progression in the tournament. You know, like that. Like that could be the way to do it. Really, like they lose, but then they get back at the winners. You know, and then it leads to another match at Full Gear or something like that. But, it's definitely going to be very interesting to see what the women do. And as I said before, and I'll say it again, that there is a bunch of controversies to this. In my opinion, when I put everything together, I really just don't give a fuck. I'm happy to go. It's entertaining, and it entertains me enough to want to enjoy what I'm seeing, really. Like, sometimes that happens in movies. Like, for example, like The Crow, the movie that came out last year, the really, really shitty one, I think it was this year or last year, I wanted to see that film because I wanted to see, like, how it was going to turn out. Sometimes, if people are buying money to see a train wreck, you can't say the train wreck is that bad. If people are paying money to see a train wreck, somebody's paying money to see something that's not put together that well, and it's still, like, drawing a decent-sized audience, then, it is what it is, really. But it goes down to what I've said and what Off the Mic Show is saying as well, really, that there could be a better standard. There could be a better standard, and if there's a better standard and expectations and quality and them using AI and other things like that to tell some stories and tell some reasonable stories to make this more compelling, you won't be having 4,000 people, maybe 5,000 or 6,000. You'd be selling out that fucker, which is 16,000, so they're probably going to do maybe like around 10 or 11,000 less than maximum capacity. And it comes down to story and what they've done with the women's division over the past year. And then also the other thing, as I said before, and I'll say it again, they have Wembley Stadium. And I have a psychic premonition that two things are going to happen. I think they're going to downsize and go to the O2 for All Out because they're not going to have enough people. And then what WWE can do is say, well, you're not going to go to the O2. What we're going to do to you is that while you're at Wembley Stadium, we're going to get the O2 and have a show there. So that way you have Wembley Stadium and crappy attendance, and it's going to look bad for AEW while WWE has has counterbooks. And I think that's what WWE is going to do, really. So I really, really hope that as I said with AEW, the biggest way to fight WWE this year is to rebuild all your divisions very strongly. So it'll be very interesting to see what they do with this match. It'll be interesting to see what they do with wrestlers that haven't gotten that many chances, like Megan Bain, Marina Shafir, Triangle of Madness, Harley Cameron, Jamie Hayter, Queen Aminata, and I would even throw in a Willow Nightingale. Like, really, the only women that haven't allowed to do their best is really Tony Storm and Mercedes Moné, really. Everybody else, what's going to happen in this match and what's going to be the follow-up for the rest of the year to that Wembley Stadium show. Let's start the road to Wembley Stadium. Let's start making AW bigger and better. This is definitely going to be a really controversial match, and it's going to really show some either goodwill or bad will, and it'll be interesting to see what happens, really. So got my plane tickets. and I'm off to there in about a week. You broke motherfuckers.